This is The Word. Welcome back. Today we will discuss a grab bag of interesting, quite frankly ridiculous topics. But as always, I do have my good friend, Word regular contributor Annika Wolf. Annika, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Thank you very much for being on the program again.
Always. I enjoy it.
So I'm going to ask you if you heard about this, because I just discovered it recently. I didn't hear about this controversy when it erupted in 2010. But in that year, Urban Outfitters introduced a short-sleeved, I guess, kind of shirt. I think it was for women. And the name of the color on the shirt was called Obama Black.
I think they do it on purpose.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you can say it's blunders.
You know what their one in '03 was?
No, please tell me.
They had a T-shirt with like a Monopoly knockoff called Ghetto-opoly. The properties were like Cheap Trick Avenue and Smitty's Black Peak Show, hustle bonus funds, like you got your whole neighborhood addicted to crack, collect $50.
Oh my God!
The African American clergy called for a boycott and saying that there's no other way than this had racist intent. They had one that said, I support same-sex marriage, which is great, and then they pulled it off the shelf a week later, saying that there was too much bad press. And apparently there was no press. There was one negative blog entry.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Well, and then,
Black, there was one against the Navajos.
It wasn't against... No, hold on. It wasn't against the Navajos. What they had this range of products that were in this sort of like, like commercialized Native American style, and they said these are Navajo, and they had nothing to do with the Navajo tribe.
Well, they're made by Native Americans.
I don't think who would believe that their stuff made at Urban Outfitters was made by the Navajo?
People don't necessarily know. What about the Holocaust Jewish Star shirt?
Yeah.
I mean, we do it because that way every couple of years somebody talks about Urban Outfitters.
And it works, but I think it's growing old. But, and they were also...
it's very old. It's very old.
And, I think, they were also under fire for selling, like, flasks that were, Navajo, that is... That's bad.
Yeah, well, I think it shows that of all the ones they did two that were considered anti-Jewish.
They did, yes. Yeah, and several that...
That's the only group that well, no, I guess the African-American one, too, was Ghetto-opoly and the...
Yeah, it's really distributed,
those were the only two that,
Urban Outfitters is kind of, distributing its controversial messages through many ethnic minorities. It's not really picking and choosing, but... and then,
I'll tell you, the one that killed me was the yellow shirt with the Jewish star, because that was the opposite, and it was always a black thing with a yellow Jewish star on it, so they just switched it and made it a yellow shirt with the, black and gray star.
Yeah.
So I think that was particularly obnoxious because of the specific color choicing that they did. And there was no way that they did that not to anger the Jewish community. I really believe that.
So you don't think there's any argument to be made, that oops, it was an accident or whatever?
No, God, no. Not on stuff like that.
It's just, why, like, what do they have to gain from angering a community?
Because any community, there are always pros and cons to. Like, there are some people that hate Jews and some people that like Jews.
I feel like, aren't they cutting out that Jewish customer or driving them away?
Oh, yeah,
So, there are, you mentioned a lot of their more controversial clothing offerings, but, some other of their controversial items included a T-shirt that featured Idi Amin, Kim Jong-il, Saddam Hussein, and Hitler, all on the same shirt.
I didn't hear about that
just
one.
Lined up in a row. There was a T-shirt with a picture of Mickey Mouse's hands grabbing a pair of a woman's breasts. There are many, like, extremely provocative advertisements released by this company. Tawdry, kind of almost pornographic, like bordering on pornography style. There's an ad where a woman's underwear is being ripped off, so her buttocks is partially exposed. There's an ad with a woman who's just baring her breasts completely. And then there's an ad where two models actually show their vaginas.
Really?
Yes.
How did they get around the obscenity laws on that one?
See, I have no idea, but if you even but think about it, and I was confused at first too, but if you just produce an ad like that, and just throw it up on your website, you don't even have to actually place the ad anywhere, because people will hear about it and they'll come see it,
Essentially, and there you go. Once they're in the store, they might buy something.
Yeah, exactly. So, all of these things that various groups and people have found provocative and, you would argue are meant to incite attention. What does this say to you about Urban Outfitters as a whole?
I mean, I would not support a company like that because I personally consider it bad taste.
I agree.
I won't shop there specifically because of things like that. That bothers me.
So, and obviously Urban Outfitters is not alone in this, I guess you could say, this type of activity to try to gain business success. Of course, there's good old Abercrombie and Fitch.
It's outrageous activity.
It really is provocative and outrageous activity. In 2002, Abercrombie and Fitch really started to become kind of a lightning rod for criticism in the early 2000s. And in 2002, they started selling shirts featuring caricatures of Asians with slanted eyes and wearing these, kind of hats, like Vietnamese hats, printed with phrases such as Wong Brothers Laundry Service, two Wongs can make it white. The retailers, so when confronted about this, the retailer's PR firm told the San Francisco Chronicle that we personally thought Asians would love this t-shirt. Which is a pretty remarkable statement, actually. Is it conceivable to you that, as Abercrombie and Fitch's public relations department says, that these shirts would be loved by Asians? Do you think they actually believed that?
I think that's a crock.
Yeah. You think they're lying, basically, because they were caught?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and Abercrombie and Fitch is obviously, probably not as comfortable with releasing items that they know will be provocative as Urban Outfitters is, but they've definitely had their moments over the years. They are no stranger to controversy. They produced a t-shirt that reads, "Do I make you look fat?" Namely, that is their big one, They also produced a t-shirt that read, "Who needs brains when you have these?" And it was a woman's t-shirt and it was over her breasts. And finally, I guess this was in the mid-2000s, they were accused of selling what were push-up bras to children in their Abercrombie kids stores, children and early teenagers, and that was obviously very controversial as well. And the reason that, I guess they kind of got away with this, as in they didn't, maybe they apologized here and there, but the overall idea of Abercrombie and Fitch stayed the same. And it stayed the same because up until 2008, they were wildly successful. But, this article from Bloomberg Businessweek goes on to say Abercrombie and Fitch's skin-filled ads and nightclub vibe once delighted American teenagers and infuriated parents. Today, many aren't even paying attention. The once edgy retailer has lost a third of its market value in the past year as it grapples with falling sales. While Abercrombie blames the economy for its woes, brand consultants say it has also failed to change with the times. Today's teams are underwhelmed by the half-naked models and blaring dimly lit stores. They're also less inclined to wear Abercrombie's long-term uniform of pricey denim. Abercrombie, which declined comment for the story, shuttered 71 U.S. stores in its most recent fiscal year, and in February said it will close another 180 over the next coming years leading up to 2015. So, they've probably, out of the companies that survived the recession, they have been the one that is the one among those that have been hurt probably the most. They've really struggled to re-find themselves post-2008.
Well, good. I think they're a disgusting company, personally. I think they're overpriced. Their stores stink when it gets to be an asthma attack.
So, but I would ask you,
Yeah.
I mean, this is related. What do you believe has caused the downturn in sales at Abercrombie and Fitch stores since 2008? They would say, whoa, it's just the economy. But do you think
Since 2008, the economy is tumbled downhill.
Yeah.
And some of these parents that had enough money to buy their kids whatever they wanted at their whim, now are struggling, and they're not...
So, besides economic concerns, do you think there are other factors which would turn parents off to, choosing to patronize? Yeah?
Absolutely. I know. I mean, I'm not a parent, but if I was, I would not allow my child to have clothing. And I would hope my child wouldn't want it either. I would hope my child would be intelligent enough to listen when I talk to them and I explain why this is bad,
So what do you feel...
I would hope my child would say, no, I don't want that either.
In terms of those values, what values do you feel are being imparted by this company's image that are negative?
Well, first of all, half-naked models selling clothes that are geared more to teens and high school kids, I think is sickening, personally.
Yeah.
The sexuality, there's nothing wrong with. But I think we need to not sell sex.
Like, so teens are not so willing to push the limit in terms of clothing anymore?
Well, no, I think they just choose to do it in different ways.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree.
The teens are kind of like, well, if I can't look like that Abercrombie person and be like that, then why should I have an Abercrombie shirt when I can do this and look like that?
And look edgy in a different way. And I agree. And Abercrombie's sort of style of appealing to teens' desire to be edgy was very relevant in 2002 and 2003. In 2013, maybe not so much, Do you think that there is merit to the criticism of Abercrombie that they have not changed with the times, that they are kind of a relic?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It seems like the same old stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Is Abercrombie the one with the moose?
It is, indeed, yes.
Yeah. It's the same old stuff. And to be honest, we've been wearing, in Connecticut, growing up, we wore that stuff constantly, like the little seafaring type stuff.
Yeah.
It was everywhere.
Yeah.
What they did is they rehashed all this style from like the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. You're right. You're right about that. But, American preppy style goes back to, 30s, 40s, whenever. Even though it did close down many stores in this past fiscal year, it did open up 47 new locations. And, the company does maintain that its styles do remain fresh and popular with many teens. But, a critic cited in this article says the pipeline of coolness is disappearing. And once it dries up, then they will dry up. So it's a pretty final kind of statement that sort of their days are numbered.
I think their days are numbered and they closed more stores this year because of what they said this year.
You think so?
Absolutely. I mean, you don't call someone fat.
Well,
because the fact is, body image, you're saying you don't want to sell the fat people, whatever. The fact is, we are all, as Americans, incredibly body image conscious.
That is true. But I think that there is something really...
And the kids especially, I mean, I think that it really ticked off enough parents where I think a lot of parents were like, look, you're not going to wear that.
I am very...
you're not going to have it. You're not going to buy it. You're not going to go in the store when you're around me.
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
I will not catch you wearing their clothes.
Yes. I'm very suspicious when it comes to this controversy in particular, when it was kind of breaking recently, because, number one, I was confused as to why anybody was surprised that this was the... or taken aback that this was the position of the company and where it was kind of positioning itself.
I'll tell you exactly why. Yep.
My response to this whole, Abercrombie, the weight controversy, I guess you could say, they have many different ones, but this particular scandal, I am utterly confused as to why it sort of erupted in, 2012, 2013, because the quote that every reprint of the article every journalist citing this scandal was from an interview that Mike Jeffries, who runs the company, he gave that interview in I think it was either 2003 or 2004, and I read the article back in 2006, and so I'm really confused why
nobody noticed it then. I really think that's what happened.
And then somebody found it?
Kind of stopped. It just didn't get noticed, and all of a sudden there was something that happened with that line, and, you know.
I mean, it seems very suspicious to me, and I was talking with some other people who sort of have kind of more of a business sense than I do, and they said, stuff, sort of corporate espionage between, or kind of scheming between competitors is very common. And I said, well, how does that figure into this? And, he said he would not be surprised if, a competitor sort of, directed a journalist to this old interview. I mean, it was up on, I think it was Salon.com's website. It's been up for years, just directed them and said, oh, look at this. And then, the journalist kind of capitalized on it. I would not be surprised if a competitor used that to sort of, and it worked very effectively. And yeah, Abercrombie said it, but it's not news though. I mean, and I'm just like, how could you not notice their bias against people who are of a larger size?
Well,
like,
look at the Urban Outfitters. I mean,
but I don't know, but Urban Outfitters did not get as much attention as this Abercrombie & Fitch fat scandal did,
The interview was '06 that he said that. And even though they said, that he didn't want fat or not so cool kids wearing his clothes,
Indeed.
The policy has not deviated.
Why they
I
lost
think
their edge?
their clothes are dated and boring.
You think
don't
so?
know them well enough, but I don't think they've had a new or different line in quite a while.
And I think...
nothing drastically new or different.
And it's partly because, one thing is, they've blundered in this sense because, they are a chain that is more reliant on sort of, teenage and young adult targeted merchandise that is based on classic American preppy styles. So that while at times Abercrombie has been, quote, trendy, because they were very popular at a certain point, they're not necessarily trendy in the way that designers of high fashion are, as in they're not rolling out any new concepts. This is stuff that has been kind of American staples for so long. So I think that may explain partly why they've lost their cool. But also, anytime they do try to innovate is usually when you get these offensive T-shirts. It's like that's the only thing that they could come up with,
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, do you know that supposedly this Jeffries guy demands that his male employees only wear boxers and not briefs?
Seriously?
Yes.
And what is the corporate rationale for that?
I don't know, but that's what this guy... I mean, look, there's no... And, it's illegal to not hire someone based on their looks. It is illegal, but the problem is you can get rid of it. You can always say, well, it wasn't a good personality fit,
Yeah, or whatever.
When you're hiring a new employee. Right. I would love to see an employee there get fat for some reason, even if it's only a fat suit or whatever, and see them get fired.
It would be an interesting expose for sure, because...
It would be an interesting expose, but I guarantee you it would happen.
Absolutely.
Because this guy seems, that's his thing.
Absolutely.
And again, it's not even the fat people thing. Have you heard his entire comment?
I read the article like 6, 7 years ago.
I'll tell you what his statement was.
Okay.
This is a quote, in every school there are cool kids and there are popular kids, and then there are the not-so-cool kids. Candidly, we go after the cool kids. We go after the attractive, all-American kids with a great attitude and lots of friends. A lot of people don't belong in our clothes. They can't belong. Are we exclusionary? Absolutely. So it's not just that he wants the skinny kids, but he wants the cool kids.
Indeed.
So he doesn't even want, the geek wearing his clothes.
Oh, no, that's not what market they're targeting,
There's fatism,
And, that really says to me that, again, people shouldn't be that surprised. Like, be outraged, feel about it feel passionate about it if you wish, but I have such a hard time believing. I mean, isn't it obvious that this is what this company has built its kind of second act and its success upon? This kind of idea of targeting a very specific customer.
Well, in the long run, and stay around in the long run.
Yeah.
Even when an economy turns bad, are the companies that cater to everyone.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And once you block out any portion of the, card carrying, bill carrying consumer, you are losing business, and it is stupid. It is absolutely stupid.
I think
you want to keep as many people as you can buying your item.
Well, I mean, I don't think that it is. It's not, but no. It's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as that. Because, okay, well, where do specialty retailers fit in with that? Because there is more than just kind of, this you should appeal to everyone kind of ideal.
No, but you have a specialty line.
Well, but no.
You've got different collections.
Can everyone be a Walmart? Can everyone be a Target? Can everyone be a Sears? No, and there are a lot of companies.
I'm not saying that. But I'm saying we can have multiple sizes of everything, and then have a special line of the fall high school. That you don't exclude a group. But why exclude somebody who's got the money who can buy your product?
I just think that's not, from a business perspective, which is not a perspective that I usually am looking through. I just think that's not realistic. You cannot appeal to everyone at the same time and be successful. If you're putting yourself in all of these different market areas, you will have a multiplicity of other.
Okay, that's not what I'm saying. I understand that they want to hit that young age group.
Yes.
Hit the young age group. But you don't need to limit the sizes in that young age group.
Okay, I get what you're saying. If
you're going to hit the 18 to 24-year-olds, the fact is they're a size 2 and they're a size 22. Give yourself a more broad spectrum. There are cool fat kids in high school.
I see what you're saying, and I do agree with you. Yeah.
And then if you really want to have fun, go out and do the nerd retro chic line every once in a while.
Yeah. I mean...
And you can include other people as well. Like those old school 70s and 80s, Atari T-shirts, which are so in.
See, but I agree with you halfway in the first part of what you were saying, but the second part of what you were saying, if you're targeting a specific age group, I think you should. I think it would be more beneficial to more people if you were to provide all the sizes. But in terms of changing your style to suit, Abercrombie is never going to be able to compete with Hot Topic. They are just two style segments.
And they're two completely different things. But Hot Topic offers a lot more sizes.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. Absolutely.
They offer all sizes.
But I don't think you're going to see any sort of
Justice. Justice is the tween market. It's the younger market.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, they offer all the different sizes. And let me tell you, as someone who has, who knows some tweens, they're all about the Justice. That's all they want.
Yeah, Justice is big.
Because any single kid in all their friends, all of their friends, skinny, fat, tall, short, they all wear Justice.
And that is proved to be...
the Abercrombie kids, only a small population of that 18 to 24 bracket can wear Abercrombie.
Yeah, so I do agree with you, because it's almost like I think that they are doing what most clothing retailers have done, but they're taking it so far and they're defining their niche so strictly that when there are bad economic times or when the cycle of fashion turns against them, they have not built up. They are not even making themselves accessible enough to a large enough consumer base to actually be able to support themselves as a business.
Mm-hmm.
But this article...
And I'm looking up now when Abercrombie even started.
1890 blank. And up until 1992...
1892.
Until 1992, it was a manufacturer of outdoor equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And then it... kind of began its second rebirth.
They haven't even done clothes for 20 years yet.
Yeah,
They've only done clothes for 15 years.
About 20 years, yeah. But before that, they were kind of like an LL Bean, so they did have some clothing, but it was outdoors.
That's what I'd always thought. Okay.
What?
When I was growing up, I thought I remembered them as like an REI type store.
What's REI? Recreation or?
Yeah, like sporty type stuff.
Yeah, they were that.
Outdoor goods.
But I guess
so they were like that.
They were like that. But in the 90s, I guess they determined that it was more profitable to go into young adult clothing, I guess.
Right.
And they were successful for a good, 15, 17 years, but
until they started doing stupid things.
Well, they were doing they were this, that point that they haven't changed is really accurate, because really they were milking the same strategy. It's just that I think there's only so far.
But you notice something. He gave that interview in '07, right? And when did their sales start sinking?
I believe he gave that. Well, I mean, I think he gave that interview in 2003.
No, '07.
It was in '07?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yes, I just read it to you when I read that last snippet.
But this article continues that Mike Jeffries, the CEO, used Abercrombie's reputation for quality to charge more for youthful styles, recruiting all-American teens and college-age kids to model and work as salespeople. Risque quarterly catalogs featuring young tout bodies enraged religious groups. The formula worked from 1995 through 2008, when the company boosted annual sales more than 20-fold and net income more than 56-fold. So they were one of the biggest boom stories in teen clothing in the early 2000s. Then the economy collapsed.
And then they started doing all this stuff.
Well, but they've been doing all of this stuff, though. That was their kind of philosophy from day. I mean, minus the racist stuff, but the core of the business.
But no, not the sex sells.
Oh yeah, absolutely. From the beginning, it was a very sexed up brand. Absolutely.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Oh yeah, I mean it's all. I mean, maybe they've pushed the limit in some new ways, but they've always been. They're selling sex in the form of clothing. That has always been their strategy since they were a clothing, manufacturer. So it's really been. I think it's just it's kind of novel way to sell clothes when it first came out, but I think it's because there's only so far you can go with this strategy. You can only milk it for so many generations.
I don't know if you're aware, but David Abercrombie was born and raised in Baltimore.
Seriously?
Yes.
Oh.
Ezra Fitch was a lawyer in New York. They opened their first place in downtown New York City.
Wow, he's from Baltimore.
In a waterfront.
Very interesting. And the last sentence here, well, there's more. It says, then the economy collapsed, in 2008 and made it hard for Abercrombie & Fitch to sell $70 jeans. Today's teens, this article argues, are radically different from other generations, including millennials now in their 20s, because they reject uniforms. As a, quote, millennial, I don't know if I agree with that, but do you, that millennials reject uniforms?
Okay. It kept growing and growing and growing until it went bankrupt in '77. And then a sporting goods called Oshman's from Houston bought it.
Okay.
And then the Limited bought Abercrombie & Fitch in '88. So that's when they really started doing the clothing stuff, was when the Limited bought them.
Okay. Yeah.
Because the Limited is all clothing.
It is all clothing, yes. So it makes you wonder
that's why the company drastically changed that much.
So it makes you wonder why the Limited would even have an interest in a property that was known for outdoor equipment,
I think because it sounded good. Abercrombie & Fitch sounds very upper crust.
And it had this, and for people that remembered it had this image of quality,
Right. For anybody that remembered it, it had an image of quality, and for another population, it sounds like a two-person,
it's trendy,
famous whatever,
Yeah.
Like Van Cleef and Arpels, the two famous jewelers,
Yeah.
Things like that. I think that they were looking at something like that. Dolce and Gabbana,
But do you agree that...
I think they thought that Abercrombie & Fitch would do something like that for them.
But do you agree with this person writing this article that today's teens and 20-year-olds reject uniforms?
Oh, they all do that. Absolutely. It's always your outer fringe that does differently.
And it goes on to say Abercrombie continues to focus heavily on its old standbys, as you mentioned, such as $30 T-shirts. Abercrombie is still running an offense, which is a huge banner of a bare-chested guy with a cute girl who's not wearing enough clothing. It's vacuous, he says. There's no core idea there anymore. Do you agree with this statement that the kind of idea of Abercrombie and Fitch is vacuous and that they don't have really a core idea uniting their brand?
I agree with that.
And so what happened to their kind of core idea?
I can't think of any core idea that they have.
Well, isn't that kind of, standing for skinniness, being popular, all-American, attractive, athletic, isn't that their core idea?
Well, I don't know if that's an idea. That's their ideal customer, but that's not a core idea.
So what would
that's
an example...
That's the they want buying their stuff.
See, I think it is, though. I think maybe a lot of people would find it a negative idea, but I think that's it's just cool. Cool and young and attractive that unites them, And skinny,
Yeah,
But,
I don't know if that's an idea, per se. That's their ideal customer.
Yeah. I don't know. But, so, I guess it's a question of, and I'll ask you what you think, that did they just kind of lose this, well, you wouldn't call it an idea, but did they lose this kind of ideal, or did people just stop wanting the ideal or desiring the ideal?
I think that the more open people have gotten open-minded, and I think kids are becoming a little more open-minded.
Oops, sorry. Yeah.
No, I really do. I'm not saying it's a lot, but I think they're becoming more open-minded.
And so they
because of things like Glee, where you have a fat kid who's cool, and
so you would reject. So so you believe that because of this?
No, seriously, I think because of that, kids are starting to look away from it, because I think it will bother some kids that their friends can't wear what they want.
So you think that
that struggle.
So outlets like Abercrombie and Fitch, what they stand for, is now found to be like distasteful among the youth?
I think so. I think it's...
So what I thought was very interesting was not only reading the article, but I went through some of the comments that people were making, and most of them were, frankly, very negative about Abercrombie. Here's one comment. He said, the way to get customers back into the stores at Abercrombie and Fitch is to stop adding logos to everything produced. The quality is there in the products, but after a certain age, one cannot wear Abercrombie and Fitch without being seen as trying to remain young. Go back to producing well-made basics, trend-fitting jeans, and products that knock the socks off the competition in terms of quality, color, and fit. Do you think that has contributed to them kind of rotating out of the wheel of cool because there's just such an overload of logos and kind of branding?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it is a young kid's brand, and I think that once you do hit like 30, if you're still wearing it, the rest of the 30-year-olds will laugh at you.
Of course that doesn't stop people. And I agree with this commenter when he says that one cannot wear Abercrombie and Fitch without being seen as trying to remain young. Because
Absolutely.
There is just, I think there are certain items that you can, if you are over, say, 35 or whatever. But the kind of over-embellishment in terms of the very large logos or extremely distressed jeans, they are coded in our society, and people see them as, oh, well, they are just trying to, look so cool and trendy and young. Because Abercrombie and Fitch have aligned themselves so much with that kind of young, extremely fit, whatever kind of I'm youthful, I'm pretty ideal, that it looks ridiculous. But if you think about Abercrombie is basic. It's basic American preppy kind of essentials. Just, one step down from Brooks Brothers and more sexed up, And so if you would strip out the logos and you would strip out all the holes in the jeans, these are not clothes that anybody would be embarrassed in walking about. It's the fact that they are so over-branded that in some contexts it looks very silly, And so,
absolutely, I agree.
And there were other comments that criticized Abercrombie on a variety of fronts. saying, one said, ever consider that the kids' parents can no longer afford these clothes because they're out of work, which is really the only way in which they will even concede that they have a weakness is that they're dealing with a weakened economy. Then there was also, Abercrombie, it was someone who was very extreme and said Abercrombie and Fitch should be investigated and punished by the Justice Department immediately, which is probably the most kind of extreme.
I don't think you can do that because the fact is they are a company, and as a company they're allowed to do what they're allowed to do.
And you know what? I think the person that they will end up hurting the most is themselves. Because, you're right, as you said, as a company, you can target whatever market you want. But if that market is too niche and it's too small to sustain you and to have sustainable growth, then your business opportunities will dry up, and I think that's what Abercrombie's finding. So it's not that they're necessarily hurting so many other people, but I think the person they're hurting the most is their future, Somebody else said they are completely irrelevant for 2013. Another person said, ain't no fat person wearing that shit, which is probably true. But that's not true, because the second person after this person said that is not true, I have seen so many out-of-shape men wearing their products. And I can concur. One of the few positive comments actually came. I've always been pleasantly surprised by the exceptional durability of Abercrombie & Fitch clothing, and I can attest to this as well. I have clothing from middle school that not only still fits me, but it is still in one piece, and I've had clothing from more upscale retailers than Abercrombie, such as J. Crew, that has fallen apart after 1 year. So the one thing that they do well consistently is in many cases, almost all cases, they do quality well. They just have a lot of these other problems that really hurt their business base, And then another person was complaining about the people who were complaining about Abercrombie. He said, you guys all make me laugh sitting on your computers moaning about Abercrombie & Fitch. It's a clothing brand, that's all. If it gets to you that much, you have way too much time on your hands. If you don't like it, don't buy it. Problem solved. Is that the truth? That it's a clothing brand and that's all?
But I think if you don't let people know what's going on, then how do they know not to buy it? I mean, he heard it from someone else has to hear it from someone.
I mean, I agree with that.
There's absolutely nothing wrong in exposing stuff.
That's true.
And talking about it.
Absolutely. I agree with with this person who says that, it's just a clothing brand. And I think it doesn't even really, this controversy is just so, it was manipulated by the media, and a lot of people have a lot of anger because as people who are not considered attractive or people who are overweight, they are treated unfairly in society. And they are given disadvantages, and they're held out of advantages. So a lot of people have a lot of anger, and Abercrombie is only the easiest manifestation of this in society. So it feels good to vent at this, what Abercrombie represents. But at the end of the day, I think people don't have to worry about it because Abercrombie, it looks like that it will probably fall, and it will fall of its own accord, not the doing of others. It will do itself in if this keeps up, this article did make another point. I will admit that in this discussion, I probably have more items from Abercrombie than any other store, and that's because I like it. But also,
you even wear their underwear.
Pardon?
You even wear their underwear.
I do have one pair of their underwear, yes.
I know, because when you do wear it, you make sure your pants are lower so everybody can see it.
That's not true. Oh my God. Whatever. Do not listen to her. Do not listen to her. She is sowing deceit. You know what? I think...
How else would I have seen your underwear? Okay. I want to know.
I will give no context to that statement. We need to continue. So I will admit that I'm a big fan of it, but you know what? I have the advantage of being in their body size that they are targeting. I am privileged.
And you're paying for it.
I'm privileged in that sense because a lot of people don't have access to that in terms of money or being what is considered thin, So I'm privileged, and you have to be privileged to have access to this clothing, and that's kind of their appeal. But yeah, so... And, there are other competitors like H&M, Zara, and Forever 21 that have become stronger and stronger since Abercrombie has started to decline in 2008. And they do
H&M has gotten much bigger.
Yes. They do specialize in drastically lower prices, higher variety and variability of items. There will be many different types of trends, but also the trade-off you get in that exchange is that your items are substantially lower quality. And I found that with H&M when I sampled some of their things. I only really get accessories from H&M because after years of shopping at Abercrombie, H&M and even other places, like I said, J. Crew, in terms of material, it just doesn't add up. I mean, it doesn't measure up. And so, but I think that, you know, there's a quote here I want to read, that teens go to these places like H&M, Zara, and Forever 21, and those places are called like fast fashion. That's the kind of name for them. But for consumption and lack of quality rather than for quality. Fashion today reflects the attitude, buying cheap knockoffs more often rather than buying for quality. He said it's not the logo, it's the price for people who go to fast fashion. That simply Abercrombie is too expensive for some of today's youth. And I think that's really something that Abercrombie may understand, but they may be unwilling to change themselves for, which is that the teen market and it probably is mostly owing to the recession, but probably some other factors too, it is just moving towards a lower price point, an emphasis on price, what is the word I'm looking for? Price competitiveness rather than kind of status, you know? It's moving towards that for this moment, you know?
Important to people.
So I have a question for you. In terms of these fast fashion stores where items are cheaper, more varied, and lower quality, you know, I think it's pretty easy to say, I think we can both agree that the teen and young adult market is moving that way. But do you see the same trends in the adult market for older people? Do you think it's moving in the same direction towards price, a lower, more affordable price?
I think it's both price and quality. I think more people, instead of shopping at Nordstrom's, are going to Nordstrom's Rack.
Okay.
And, you know, waiting for the super sales and things like that.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really wants to pay full price anymore. You know, not that anyone ever did, but I think more people were willing to.
And even, you know, in Abercrombie's heyday, there was almost, not only was there status about existing in that environment, absorbing those images, but also purchasing their clothing, but there was even a sort of status among teens and young adults of paying full price. That was a status symbol, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't think that necessarily that
it was a big Benetton. I remember when Benetton was the hugest thing.
Yeah.
Benetton and Banana Republic.
But, you know, in the current cycle of young adult fashion, that's just not really a selling point anymore. You know, that's not something that people would admire you for. There would be more, right. You know, people like my sister and my brother and their cohort, they would say to that, well, that's not sensible. You could get blank, blank, blank at some other place, whereas people who are more in my age cohort grew up where that was more esteemed, you know? And then finally, you know, one of the last comments that was made on this article was somebody who said this was inevitable. Abercrombie & Fitch made itself so successful last decade that simply thinking about them is enough to recall the 2000s. And I totally agree with that. They are starting to become a relic, in a sense, which is funny because if you think about it, lots of people talk about American preppy style as timeless. Well, the way that Abercrombie & Fitch has spun it, apparently it's not timeless in that context because they really are starting to seem like a relic of literally the past decade. They're like a relic of the overindulgent, hyper consumption era that was pre-recession, you know? They embody that, you know, that housing boom kind of mentality. You know,
that is very true. You know, I think that people didn't care, and I think people wouldn't have cared if they were forward-thinking. But the fact is,
they're not forward-thinking,
because their brains are stuck in the past, I think that's what affected it. I think people would have really been willing to overlook a lot, but they are not willing to overlook anymore.
I agree. And it's just, you know, it's not, going through this, there are so many reasons for its fall, and it's not like a cut and dry story. But it's really like, you know, in a sense,
CEO seems to be the main reason for their downfall.
What did you say?
I said it does kind of seem cut and dry to me, and it all goes back to Jeffries.
You think so?
I think Jeffries has been the cause of the downfall, and his malice and his ideas. But that's when the brand started going downhill.
Well, but
if you look at the financial projections,
but I think, but no. Okay,
it's not
but
just what he says, but it's how he did business.
It's true that 2008 is when their kind of golden age ended, but that was when the recession happened. So I don't think that you can draw an equivalency there. You know, I think
maybe it's coincidence, but I don't know.
But the recession happened in 2008. I mean, you can't find you would be hard-pressed to find a single clothing retailer that did not suffer a drop in 2008. You know, and that's the truth.
Yeah.
But I think that really
that is true.
It's true. It's true. But I think, really, another point that I want to make is you can be edgy but not be forward-thinking. Exactly what you said. They are not a forward-thinking brand in terms of their portrayal of gender roles, not forward-thinking. Their styles and fashion are not forward-thinking. Their marketing techniques are not forward-thinking. Their price structure is not forward-thinking. Their sizing is not forward-thinking. If you are this conservative, really, at the end of the day, it may be edgy or seen as edgy at some point by some people, but they are fundamentally conservative in the fact that they are unwilling to move along with evolving ideas in society. They're stuck in the past.
Yeah.
Their ideas are stuck in the past.
And like I said, I think Jeffries is an awful lot to do with that.
Yeah, because, he is the one riding. Well, I mean, but it was slightly different from what you said before. You said it was his big mouth. I think that...
you're right. I missed that.
But if you're...
I think it's him. It's him, period.
Yeah, if you're talking about his, decision-making, I mean, he's the driver at the wheel. So I would say, yeah, I mean, he's the one tasked with making the decisions for this company,
Yeah.
So I am totally in agreement. But they describe sort of his ultimate control over his employees and the style. Everyone... I did not know about the underwear thing because that seems way too inappropriate and intrusive. But I did know that, for example, he requires all of his employees to wear flip-flops all the time to work.
Uh-huh.
And even at the corporate headquarters. So, I mean, it's very much a top-down kind of structure. And those structures are never good at adapting to change. So moving on in this same
He's someone I would love to meet. Let me tell you, I would love to have a conversation with him.
Oh my God, it would be. I'm actually friends with him on Facebook.
Even if I had to sit my fat ass down to hold him down, I would love to have a conversation.
You should just sit on him. That would just terrify him. And he's
me and like 7 of my biggest fattest friends.
But so. There's one little bit more piece about Abercrombie's financial and sales figure woes. Kids these days, they're so poor and pessimistic. That was the message this morning of a horrendous financial update from Abercrombie and Fitch. Same-store sales.
The kids are poor? Wait a minute. Kids are poor?
Well, this is what Abercrombie is saying. Because they're saying it's the economy.
Kids are poor.
And pessimistic.
Right?
Yeah.
No shit, kids are poor. They're kids. Dumb shit. I mean, seriously.
The blah, 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 horrendous financial update from Abercrombie & Fitch, which is listed as ANF on the stock exchange. Same-store sales at the teen apparel giant, including web commerce, which they are not very strong in. And that's another thing that is absolutely contributing to their downfall. Not only do they have an image and a product line that does not change very much over time, but they are not very strong in social media, which is the bedrock of success these days. It's almost like they're asking
18 to 24-year-olds.
It's almost like they're asking to become irrelevant, It's just interesting. But, web commerce slid 10%, and profit fell by 1/3 to $11.4 million. Results were particularly bleak in the United States, where revenue declined 8%. Overseas sales, however, where Abercrombie is a new arrival or where it is still perceived as edgy and cool, rose 15%. It is interesting as we're breaking down so many just fundamentally bad
Why else would
decisions.
A company seem to shoot itself in the foot
so much
many times?
I know.
In that many ways, as often as they do it.
But you know what? There are so many.
Illogical.
There are so many stories of corporate failure out there that is because they've been unwilling to change with the times or change to fix their problems. I mean,
right, but this is not an old company.
It's not.
This is a young company.
I mean, in terms of Abercrombie too.
20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're right.
For the clothing aspect, all that, they're a young company.
Very young, and you know what? But you're right, because when I'm thinking of these other companies that have these same problems with ossifying, kind of conservative cultures and not being able to change at all, I'm thinking of companies that are like 50 to 100 and 150 years old. Those are the companies that have problems, I mean, this is not a General Motors type thing where they have such a legacy. In a lot of ways, they're really rootless. But I think what it is they experienced so much success in within their first 10 years that they kind of just rested on their laurels and just said, oh, we'll do the same things for over and over again. And then when it stopped working, they just thought that eventually people will come back around. They thought the problem was other people, kids who were poor, instead of, or the economy, instead of them. They can't accept that they were making mistakes,
Yeah.
I think that's their problem. But, Mike Jeffries seemed baffled by the bad financial news. He shouldn't seem baffled. It's been 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. He's had like 6 years of financial negative results. He shouldn't be surprised at this point. And he did issue a statement which really, I think, just encapsulates the kind of, this is who is running this company literally into the ground. When he was confronted with his 6th year of negative results, he made a quote to the press and said, the reasons for the weak traffic we've seen in the U.S. are not entirely clear. If they're not entirely clear to you after this long and this, I mean, me and you can work this out.
You need to quit.
Neither of us are business people, but we can even figure this out, I mean...
Yeah, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. It really doesn't.
In this case, it does not. It's simple, and a lot of it is simple. So, do you have anything else? Well, I'm going to ask you this. Do you think Abercrombie has a future? Can you envision a future for this company?
Unless they make a drastic turnaround.
So what do you think that they, like if you were to give them advice to say, you can survive if you do X, Y, Z, what would you tell them?
I think if you want to survive the next decade, you need to drop your prices, increase your size range, and drastically change your personal image.
Yes.
Your company profile.
To be more inclusive instead of exclusive.
Absolutely.
And I absolutely concur with you. So really they're going to have to come to that realization that they cannot continue to prosper at their price point that they're at right now.
Right.
And they may have to drop down to be in the same price point as, say, American Eagle maybe, which is just a notch. It's not even that drastic. It's just like a notch down, but, whatever. But, yeah, I agree with you. This is inconceivable when I was in high school that they would be in this much trouble. But I would say, yeah, they need to make some drastic power kind of moves to be able to stay around, And that's, it's either they're going to be able to do it or they're not going to be able to do it. Do you want to say anything else about this subject, your personal feelings on it, etc.?
No, I think I've made my personal feelings pretty clear. I mean,
yeah.
I don't like them.
Okay, well, we're going to go to break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Fox News' resident psychiatric expert, Dr. Keith Ablow. He's not really somebody who I look to for the best psychological advice, but he certainly gives some of the most entertaining. And by entertaining, I mean ridiculously stupid. When we come back, we're going to talk about what his take on the Chris Lane shooting, what that is, and what he announced on America Live. So we'll be right back.